Some spots in live poker just aren't bluffed almost ever, and some spots are bluffed entirely too much. And if you don't know the difference, you're torching your win rate. I've coached over 250 serious players, helping them go from winners to crushers. And even the top players were getting these spots wrong. Today, I'll show you the 8 most underbluffed spots and the 8 most overbluffed ones so you can stop leaking chips in all the wrong places and start printing where everyone else is lighting money on fire. All right, so we're gonna start with underbluff spots, and this is the check back flop and raise turn. These are in no particular order, but we're gonna start with this one. So we open here in the cutoff with JJ Reddix. We get 3-bet by the button, and the flop comes queen 4 deuce. We're gonna check it over to the pre-flop raiser. He checks it back. So what is their range in general when they check back on the flop as the pre-flop raiser? Well, if we're thinking in terms of big buckets here, it's generally going to be hands like showdown value and air. Showdown value going to be hands like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, ace king, and maybe some air, maybe a hand like 10-9 of spades or something like that, just nothing going on. So we go to the turn. Turn is a 6. We're gonna bet small here for value and protection. Their range is weak. We would very much like them to call with a hand we have in pretty bad shape. And now they raise on the turn. And here's why this spot is so underbluffed, because we talked about the range primarily is going to be showdown value and air. The type of player who's going to be aggressive with air, who's going to turn 10-9 of spades or something like that into a bluff, is generally going to be the type of player who's going to start betting that hand on the flop, right? So it's not going to be air, because aggressive players are going to play their air aggressively on the flop, right? And it's not going to be showdown value, because in general, live players just don't tend to turn showdown value into a bluff. If they had a hand here like ace king or pocket 10s or pocket 9s or something like that, they're not just going to start monkey raising on the turn. They checked back the flop so they could pot control. So what is this when they check back the flop and then raise the turn? It can sometimes be an occasional trap, maybe a hand like pocket queens, but it could also be an occasional trap, maybe a hand like pocket queens. That's right. When they check back the flop and raise the turn, this is just going to be a hand that decided to trap on the flop. And then remember, live players let fear and greed drive their decisions 99% of the time. Through the lens of fear on this turn, they checked back on the flop to trap. Now it's time to start putting money in the pot before a one-liner to a straight runs out, before a flushing card runs out. They have pocket queens here. They don't want to get a bad beat, so they start putting money in the pot right away. So the check back flop raise turn line, when they are the pre-flop raiser, this line is massively under bluffed. All right, the next one, and I've had to learn this lesson the hard way many times myself before realizing this spot is massively under bluffed. So we're going to talk about when they bet the flop, bet the turn, and then use a small kind of block size when they are in position as the pre-flop raiser. So they're triple barreling with a small river size. So let's check this out. They open on the button. We're going to defend in the big blind with jack 9 of diamonds, hoping for that sweet baby there flop, but we don't get it. We flop top pair. We're going to check it over to the pre-flop raiser. They go a little over half pot. We're going to call with top pair. Turn is a queen of spades. We check it over. They go 2/3. We've got second pair here. I think this card might be over barreled, so we are going to call one more time. River is a deuce pairing the board. We check it over, and now they go $70 in position. And I want to talk about why this small size in position as the triple barrel is massively under bluffed, and why it's so different than when they choose the small size out of position. And in position, if we look at this through the lens of fear, why might they check back a hand that bricked here like 6-7 or 7-8? Well, when they are in position, we have to turn our hand over first, right? So they don't have that fear of embarrassment of checking back with no showdown value. They can just muck their hand when we show the best hand here on the river. When they're out of position, they tend to use this kind of small sizing. It's going to be very bluff heavy, because they don't want that fear of embarrassment having to show their hand. It's embarrassing to show a bluff and you just checked and gave up, right? Well, when they're in position, they don't have to do that. So generally, this triple barrel in position size for 1/3 pot on the river going to be massively under bluffed. And if we want to zoom in a little bit, what type of hands is this going to be? Well, generally, it's going to tend to be not a nutted range, right? Because if they had a hand like pocket 5s or pocket 9s or pocket queens or queen 9 suited or something like that, they would just size up here and get a little bit more greedy. So what type of hands is this? Well, generally, it's going to be some thin value-ish type hands, maybe a hand like pocket 10s or pocket jacks, maybe even occasionally an overpair of queen X, but generally, it's not going to be top of range. So the way we exploit this is either A, we overfold, or B, we start turning our showdown value into a bluff, knowing that calling here in the spot is probably going to be our least profitable option because they are under bluffing. If you want to know not only which spots are under bluffed and over bluffed, but how to use this information against the players who are paying attention, well, I've got the sauce for you. Check out our 7-day crash course, and we will show you how to beat up all of the players in your pool, from the whales and fish to the Trine Rex and even the pros. We will give you all the sauce, how to beat up your entire player pool. Check out the Hungry Horse 7-day crash course and become the most feared player in your live pool. Sign up today. We only have 16 spots a month, limited seats. We sell out every month very quickly, so sign up before we sell out. I will see you guys there. All right, next spot that is Underbluffed is the triple barrel on the ace high board. So let's look at this. Low jack opens, we defend in the big blind, ace 8-6, we check it over, they c-bet, we call. Turn is the innocuous deuce of hearts, they double, we call. River's a jack, we check it over once again, and they triple barrel on this river. Now these ace high boards are underbluffed for 2 reasons, and the second one may surprise you a little bit. So the first reason, it's harder to find these intuitive bluffs on this board, right? Low jack is supposed to be turning hands like 6x into a bluff at a very high frequency. Also supposed to be triple barreling with a lot of bricked spade draws. Hands like queen 10 of spades, queen 9 of spades, 10 9 of spades. Where generally when a lot of players look at solvers, they see the spade draws are supposed to be given up on the river. A lot of times on these ace high boards, these are the bluffs we're supposed to find. So harder to find the intuitive bluffs. The second reason is on these ace high boards, especially from an early position open, the low jack is not supposed to be betting thinly on this river. Hands like ace king and ace queen are pure checkbacks on this river, and the worst hands a low jack is supposed to be betting for value here are 2 pair like ace 6, ace 8, and ace jack. So the second reason, because the ace king, the ace queen, the ace 10 for certain are supposed to be checked back on this river. I imagine in game in live poker, that just doesn't really happen all the time. In most spots, I would say live players aren't betting thinly enough, but in this particular spot, they're probably betting too thin, and they're not finding some of the unintuitive bluffs like 6x, king 7 of hearts, or king 5 of diamonds on this board. So what that means is they are massively under bluffing on these ace high boards when they triple barrel. All right, next spot here, the check call donk line. So let's look at it. We flop a set here. We're gonna c-bet, they call. Turn is a 9. On this turn, they are relatively capped, but they are inelastic. What's that mean? Well, they're capped because they would raise hands like pocket 3s, king 4, king 3 suited on the flop. So the best hand they're going to have getting to this turn is going to be a lot of king X. Their king X and draws are going to be relatively inelastic on this turn, which means they're not going to fold even to a big size. So on these type of turns where our opponent is capped but inelastic, I like to choose very big sizes with both our bluffs and our strong hands. I go 1.5x pot, we get called. River is a 6 of clubs. Our opponent now comes out and donks for 250 into 400. And this line is underbluffed with one caveat that we will talk about in a second. When we have shown nothing but aggression, right? We have raised pre-flop, c-bet on the flop, chosen an overbet on the turn. Now the nuts change and our opponent comes out and donks for a pretty big size. This is going to be massively underbluffed. Like, what is our opponent turning into a bluff here? 5-6 that made showdown value or something like that on the river? A hand like king queen or king jack that they're now indiscriminately turning into a bluff? No, this just doesn't happen. When we have shown nothing but aggression and our opponent fights fire with fire, this is just massively underbluffed. With one caveat, sometimes when they do choose a small size on the river, say 25% pot or 33% pot when they donk into us, well, that's going to be a little bit of a different range. They're trying to get more of a cheap showdown sometimes in that line, maybe with a hand like king X. Still probably underbluffed, but this one, when they choose the big size on the river, it is going to be flushes, and sometimes flushes. I've learned from just seeing this spot thousands of times over the years that this is going to be underbluffed. And sure, 1 out of 27 times you're going to fold here and your opponent will windmill a bluff in your face. Why did they show you the bluff? Because they want you to call the next 25 times because they are under bluffing. When our opponents show us a bluff, that means they are hoping for a call in the future because in general, they aren't bluffing enough. So take solace in the fact, even if you fold here and your opponent shows a bluff once in a while, you made the right decision long term. All right, next one that's going to be underbluffed is the multi-way donk. So we're going to open here in the cutoff, the button, small blind and big blind are all going to call. Look at that sweet baby there. And now the small blind comes out and donks for 60. This is just going to be much different than when they donk heads up, right? When they donk multi-way, going to be a range that generally is going to be strong but vulnerable hands. Maybe top pair, maybe 2 pair, maybe occasionally a big combo draw like ace deuce of spades or queen 10 of spades. In general, just going to be a pretty strong range. And maybe it's not going to be nutted, but it's it's going to be a strong range. And in general, we should be overfolding this spot because when they donk multi-way, particularly 3, 4, 5 ways on the flop into the pre-flop raiser, it is going to be massively under bluff. So I would just fold pocket tens here in this spot. And just a corollary to this, the 3-bet pot donk as well. So let's say we 3-bet on the button here, cut off open, we get cold called in the big blind, and now the big blind comes out and donks multi-way into a 3-bet pot. This is even stronger. In this spot, when they cold call a 3-bet and then just come out and donk on this flop, I would expect this player to have hands like jacks and queens all the time. Again, a vulnerable but strong hand here. I would not expect those hands to fold on blank runouts. So if we did have a hand like aces or kings here, I would just be piling in the money. When we have pocket tens, sure, I guess sometimes we're ahead of 9s and 8s occasionally, but I would expect this to be more heavily weighted towards jacks, queens, and even kings occasionally than a hand like 8s or 9s. So with pocket tens here on this flop, I would probably just fold to a multi-way 3-bet pot big donk. All right, the next one here is when they check raise the turn when we have shown nothing but aggressive action. So we open aces, they call, we're gonna c-bet, they call, turn is a jack, we're going to keep firing here, targeting hands like king X, 5, 6, etc. We go big and they check raise. The last time a live poker player check raise bluff the turn when we have shown nothing but aggressive action, George Washington Carver was president of the United States of America. This line is just not a bluff. We could just easily throw aces into the muck here. This is just going to be hands like king jack, 7s, and 4s all of the time here on this turn. When we look like we have a strong hand, when we have done nothing but take aggressive action, and they take an aggressive action in response to our aggressive action, Underbluffed. Same thing here if they take the check raise on the river instead. This is just going to be the nuts, right? This is just going to be hands like 5, 6. Occasionally they could also have 6, 5. Sometimes they have a hand like 5, 6 suited. Sometimes they have a hand like 6, 5 off. This is just going to be the nuts. When we raise pre-flop, c-bet the flop, overbet the turn, and bet the river, then they go for the check raise. This line is under bluffed. All right, this one is unintuitive and it took me a long while to figure out, so let's talk about it. This is when it checks all the way to the river and then they stab. This one is under bluffed as well. Let's talk about why. So we open ace king here. We're gonna get called in 2 spots. We've got showdown value, and when we are multi-way, I am not just going to be monkey c-betting on this board 3 ways, so it checks through. Turn, we've got ace king high, still got some showdown value, no use to turn this one into a bluff. Go all the way to the river, and the villain here in the big blind comes out and bets $35, and you would not believe how much money I've lost in this spot by flicking in the call on the river, thinking, small bet, pot small, we've got showdown value, we checked, so we could kind of use this hand as a bluff catcher. If they're the type of player who's going to start bluffing, they have carte blanche on the turn. We have checked back as a pre-flop raiser. The button has checked back after the pre-flop raiser has checked to him. If the villain in the big blind has a hand like a diamond draw or some type of straight draw here, they just have the green light to start bluffing on the turn. So the type of player that's going to check and give up with their bluffs on the turn here is not going to be the type of player who checked on the turn with 5-7 and now on the river they're going to come out and bluff with it. No, that type of player would have just gone for the bluff on the turn. Same thing with the button here. If the button had a bluff, they probably would have started it either on the flop or the turn once the pre-flop raiser has checked to them. So in general, what I've seen are in these multi-way pots, especially when it's checked all the way to the river and someone comes out and stabs, we have way less showdown value than you think here. And I would have saved so much money by just folding every single time I face one of these river stabs after it's checked all the way to the river because they are under bluffing. All right, next one here. This is simple but important, and it's just when they choose a big c-bet size. So we're going to defend the big blind here with pocket 5s. We check it over and they go pot on this flop. I used to make this mistake and I'm like, you know what? I've got an overpair to second pair. I've got a backdoor straight draw here. I've got some good stuff going on. When they choose this pot size bet, this is just going to be weighted way too heavily towards strong hands. And I'm not saying they never have weak hands in the range when they choose a pot size stab on the flop. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they have too many strong hands in this range, not enough weak hands. So our response, well, think of this as like a game of rock, paper, scissors. This is like if the button is just throwing rock 35% of the time, 40% of the time, our response is just to throw paper all of the time. And in this situation, paper is folding. They are throwing rock too much. Their range is too strong and not balanced when they choose this big c-bet size on the flop. So we should just be massively overfolding. Sometimes the best exploit is just disrespectfully folding because they don't have enough bluffs when they choose a certain size or a certain line. When players choose a large large c-bet size, sure, sometimes their plan is just to stab once and then give up, whatever. But generally their range is going to be way, way, way too strong for this big size, and we exploit that by overfolding right here, right now on the flop. All right, now let's shift gears and talk about the 8 most overbluffed spots. Let us jump in. Again, in no particular order, the first spot here is the donk in heads up pot. So we're gonna open pocket 9s here, and we get called by the big blind, and now the big blind's gonna come out and donk for 20 into 52. And this is so different than the spots we looked at earlier, where a player donked multi-way, and then they donked in a 3-bet pot. This is going to be full of shit. And in general, I think a lot of people get confused in these heads up donk spots, and they say, well, their range when they donk heads up, it's just gonna be like weak top pair and middle pair and draw. That is wrong, right? That is survivorship bias. In general, the data shows us here, this is just going to be a lot of bullshit. The reason why we ascribe the range to them in the spot of weak top pair, middle pair, draw, stuff like that, is because that's the stuff we end up seeing getting to showdown. But generally, when players donk for a small size and a heads up pot, it's just going to be a ton of garbage. So when I have strong hands here, when they donk heads up, I like to call, because if their range is a ton of garbage, I don't want the garbage to fold. I would love for them to put in another bet with their garbage on the turn. And when we have a bluff here, right? When we have a hand like 7-6 or queen 10, I also like to call because I don't want their garbage to fold right now. I would like their garbage to put in one more bet, and then we can get their garbage to fold later and take away a bigger pot when we're bluffing. So with both the value and the bluffs, I just like to put in a call because their range is so weak and so crippled when they donk for a small size in a heads up pot. This is overbluffed. All right, the next spot that's overbluffed, and this may be a little bit surprising, this is the c-bet in a wide versus wide spot. So let me explain, and the example may be a little bit counterintuitive. So we're gonna open 6-5 of diamonds. We get 3-bet by the button. We've got a suited connector, wide versus wide config. We are in there. Flop comes ace queen 8. We check it over, and the button c-bets for about 40% pot here. How often in equilibrium should the button be c-betting on this board? Button versus cutoff, 3-bet pot as the pre-flop raiser, ace queen 8 board. Take 5 seconds, think about it. Well, in equilibrium, they're supposed to be c-betting on this board, depending upon their range, somewhere between 35 to 45% of the time. The button should be in the spot. But I would estimate in live poker, we see a lot of players here just c-bet 100% of the time as the button. And this is one of those spots that's overbluffed. So we can just absolutely punish this spot and just start check raising pretty much any 2 cards that don't have showdown value here, because this spot is just so over c-bet. And the thing is, when we check raise, even to a small size like 3x on this flop, if we lock the button to just range bet on this board with all their hands, like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, we're allowed to check raise 40, 50, 55% of the time here to start applying a ton of pressure to them. And if we lock them to range bet, they're supposed to respond here to our check raise by just never folding a hand like pocket 10s with a spade, pocket 9s with a spade, pocket jacks with a spade, queen X, never supposed to be folded when it gets check raised when we lock them to range bet on this flop. That is just not going to happen. What's going to happen in all actuality, players are just going to monkey c-bet this flop. We are going to check raise. We are going to just generate a ton of folds here. This spot is overbluffed, and we can absolutely punish our opponents in this node. All right, next spot that's overbluffed, when we check back as the pre-flop raiser and they stab small on the turn. So let me show you. We open 10-9, ace 9-7 on these ace high boards. I generally am choosing an overbet or check strategy because these are the type of boards, these static boards, even when they're wet, our opponents tend to not always raise their strong stuff and not always call with their weak stuff. So on these ace high boards, like to play overbet or check. Our hand, kind of a showdown value hand. This hand does not fall into that overbet category. We just choose my very strong value, my big draws, some of my blocker, like 7x hands. This hand in between, right? Showdown value, so I'm gonna be checking this back. And this is the spot that's overbluffed. When we check back the flop and our opponents stab the turn small, a lot of players just come out and start monkey stabbing here with any 2 without showdown value after they think we've shown weakness. So like we talked about in the underbluff spot, when we show aggression and our opponents fight aggression with aggression, going to be massively underbluffed. When we show weakness, this is when our opponents actually start overbluffing, particularly when they use smaller sizes. We are going to call here. We go to a river. They go half pot again. One piece of advice I would give in this spot would be to call very, very linear. From what I've seen time and time again, often players will just monkey bet here twice with a hand like pocket 3s or pocket 4s or deuce X X for some godforsaken reason, and then we get here with a hand like king high or something like that and call down, and our opponent says, you're good. We flip over king high, and they go, oh no, wait, just kidding, and they show pocket threes or some weird combo like that they were just monkey bluffing with. Make sure that we're calling down linear. Much better here to call with a hand like 9X or 8s or 7X here, or even pocket sixes here, than it is to call with a hand like king high or jack high or something like that. This spot is overbluffed. All right, the next one that's overbluffed, and this informs one of the big strategies at Hungry Horse Poker, is when we check to them from out of position as the pre-flop raiser. So we're gonna open pocket sevens here, button's gonna call, flop comes queen 6-4, and in this spot, you guys have probably heard me talk about, I'm checking my entire range to most live players, and that is because they tend to overstab and telegraph their hand strength with their sizing. And in this spot, they are massively overstabbing. Again, the common theme here going to be when we show weakness, they just tend to start over bluffing. So in this spot, they stab. We are just going to get to call here quite a lot because they're just stabbing pretty much uncontrolled here. Any two cards that don't have showdown value, they are going to stab quite a bit on the flop. They're also just monkey stabbing here with hands like 6X or pocket fives or 4X and stuff like that. They're going to overstab. We've got showdown value with pocket sevens. This is again one of the reasons why I really like to check my range out of position to live poker players, because they tend to so massively overstab on the flop when we have shown passivity. All right, next spot that is overbluffed here, and this is the ace X turn when they are the pre-flop raisers. So let me show you. They open the button, we defend, we flop top pair, we call the c-bet. Turn is an ace and they double barrel. This spot is over double barreled. They look at this card as like, oh, this is a good card for me. This is a good card for my range. And they tend to just put in another bet here. This spot is probably under triple barreled. If we call the turn, then probably did not fire nearly enough on the river, considering the range that is double barreling on the turn. So I would say we can kind of just play Fifth Street Chicken here quite a bit, calling again on the turn because they just have too many bluffs as the pre-flop raiser. When the turn is an ace, particularly in a wide configuration, in a single raise pot, they just think,
oh, this card is better for me, so I shall put more money into the pot.
This just happens at too high of a frequency. This tends to be overbluffed. We get to the river, and in general, they just tend to give up on the river quite a bit when they don't have it. So we can be calling these turns quite a bit because they are overbluffed. All right, the next spot that is overbluffed, and this is a fun one. This is the double check from us as the pre-flop raiser. So we open 5-4 of spades, button calls. You guys know I'm a fan checking my entire range out of position to wreck players because they tend to overstab. Button checks it back. Turn is a jack. And when they check back on the flop, what is their range? Well, generally, it's going to be two categories, air and showdown value. When they have their super strong hands like sets or overpairs or 9X, they tend to just bet on the flop, particularly when the board is wet and dynamic. Remember, they let fear guide their decisions. They don't want their hand to shrivel up in strength for a bad card to come. So when they have strong hands, they just bet. So their range getting to the turn going to be a lot of showdown value. Hands like 6X, ace highs, hands like pocket threes, pocket fours, and then maybe some air like king, queen of diamonds or something like that. That just doesn't really have anything going on. So they check back and kind of wait for a little bit more clarity. That's generally going to be their range. What I like to do, especially in these single raise pots with a lot of SPR behind, is check again on blank turns with both my value and my bluffs. Why do I like to do this? Because in general, if they did have showdown value, a hand like 6X, pocket sevens, something like that, once we check twice to them, they can't resist and just start putting in a little bit of money to protect their hand against a hand like ace king. They think we got ace king when we check twice. They don't want us to get there on the river, so they start putting in money here to protect their hand. Also, when they do have an air ball that check back on the flop, when we check twice, again, that gives them the green light now, kind of gives them carte blanche to maybe start running a bluff a little bit less scary. After we have checked twice, we look super weak. They feel like we are just giving them the green light. We have ace king to kind of bluff us off of that hand. So when we check twice, they tend to put in money with their showdown value and their air. Checking twice out of position with both our value and our bluffs kind of induces our opponents to overbluff. Really good spot for us when we have a hand like 5 high here to go for the big boy check raise. We're going to get the showdown value to fold. We're going to get the air to fold, of course, but if we just came out and bet, the air would have folded. And by checking, we get the air to put in actually a little bit of money. Then we can get their entire range here to fold with the check raise, which is really nice. All right, next line that is overbluffed, the best line in all of poker. So let me explain. We're gonna open here on the button, king 5, big blind's gonna call, 10-5-4, just c-betting my entire range, choosing the sides where they raise, the strong shit call, with the weak shit they call. Turn is a queen. At this point, we've got showdown value. We've got third pair here in a single raise pot, wide versus wide config. Definitely have showdown value. So not going to just monkey barrel here, going to check back. The reason why we like to check back, because what happens on the river? They just come out and overbluff. Why is this overbluffed? They call a little bit too wide pre-flop. They just have too many hands when we open the button. They defend the big blind. Number 2, they raise their strong shit and call with their weak shit. So hands like pocket 5s, pocket 4s, 5-4 suited, pocket 10s. These hands just get raised at too high of a frequency on the flop. And number 3, they call with their weak stuff because we chose a small size. So they're gut shots. Their hands like 7-8. Maybe they're 2 overs with a backdoor, king jack of clubs or something like that. They are just going to call too much weak stuff on the flop. They're going to raise too much strong stuff. So that means when we check back the turn, their range on the river going to just be too weak, particularly when they choose this small size. Now, in general, they let fear guide their decisions, and when they do make a strong hand here, king queen of hearts or ace 3 of clubs or something like that, they have this fear that they are not going to win a big enough pot because we chose a small size on the flop and we checked back on the turn. So those hands get greedy. Their strong hands get greedy. They come out and bet 75, 100, something like that on this river. And when they have a bluff, they have the fear of getting called and looking like a big dummy. So they choose a small size, trying to get a cheap price on their bluff. And this is why this is the best line in poker. When we have showdown value, c-bet the flop, check back the turn, bluff catch the river, we are just going to be good here so much of the time. This line is massively overbluffed. Finally, the last overbluff spot, when they choose a small c-bet size, but there's a little bit of nuance here, so let's talk about it. So they're going to open on the button. We call with 6-5 of hearts. We check it over, and our opponent goes 15 into 42. This is going to be overbluffed because they tend to split their sizes, right? We talked about this before. When they use the big c-bet size, they're going to be a little bit too strong. When they choose the small c-bet size, a little bit too weak, right? Not saying our opponent never has a strong hand when they choose a small size, but their range is generally just going to be unbalanced and a little bit too weak. Like playing rock, paper, scissors, our opponent is just throwing paper a little bit too much. They're throwing paper 40% of the time here. So our response should just be to throw scissors 100% of the time. So when we have showdown value in the spot, a hand like 6x, no reason to turn this into a bluff. We should just be calling here all of the time. And when we do have a hand that doesn't have showdown value, well, here in this spot, we can just be raising because their range is too weak. And generally, you guys know I'm a big fan of using these big boy check raise sizes, but when our opponent's range is very weak, I like to be efficient and just choose the small size here because they're just gonna snap fold a lot of stuff. And when they do have a hand like 7x or pocket 9s or something like that, would love for them to call one time or twice, and then we can get them to fold later in the hand. So because their range is so weak, I choose a smaller size here because I actually would prefer that they don't fold right now. And then one little caveat here, this is important, so pay attention. The board type matters, right? We saw before those boards were wet, they were dynamic. Now let's look at this situation, ace-7 deuce. The board is static, the board is dry. So in this situation where the board is so static and so dry, a small c-bet size is going to give us a lot less information in the spot. So don't go crazy in this spot, calling too light or check raising our hands like we did on the king 7-6 with the flush draw board. This board, our opponents might bet small when they have a hand like 7s or ace deuce or something like that, because again, fear guides their decisions. In this particular spot, they don't really have anything to be scared of, right? There aren't bad turn cards if they have a hand like pocket 7s. They're going to have the nuts across almost every turn, right? So they just generally don't telegraph their hand strength with their sizing nearly as much when these boards are static and dry. So just be careful here when we're distinguishing. It's overbluffed when the board is wet and dynamic. When the board is static and dry like this, may not be overbluffed nearly as much, so proceed with caution. All right, guys, hopefully this video on which spots are underbluffed and which spots are overbluffed turns you into the biggest boy possible. Thank you guys, and have a gentle